Well, the Bonhomme Richard, the history of the ship itself begins with John Paul Jones. He was born a Scot, and he raised in Scotland and went to sea at 13 and eventually wound up in the United States. And Jones went in the U.S. Navy, and he served down in the Caribbean at the time, and then he was made captain of a little sloop called the Ranger, and he was very successful capturing a number of British merchant ships, and then actually capturing a British sloop of the same size and number. And then he went to France, and Benjamin Franklin talked King Louis into giving Jones a ship which was an old beat-up East India merchantman, so it wasn't a big deal. And Jones armed it, and then he was given also a small fleet of ships. And because he was grateful to Benjamin Franklin for arranging this for him, he named the ship the Bonhomme Richard after Franklin's newspaper in Philadelphia, which was called Poor Richard's Almanac. So he named the ship the Good Man Richard in honor of Franklin. Jones then sailed around England. Now this is like today Liechtenstein attacking the west coast of the United States, because obviously the British had the largest and the most extensive navy in the world. And but he caused a panic. People evacuated seaport towns. Lloyd's of London rates doubled and tripled. He went to a small port called Whitehaven. He burned a warehouse and the ship. And that's the first time the British, were attacked and had an enemy land on their shore since the French in the 1500s, and the Germans were never able to do it. So he was quite a guy. And then he attacked a convoy coming in from the Baltic, and it was protected by a brand new English frigate called the Serapis and a smaller ship called the Countess of Scarborough. And Jones with his fleet, he didn't waste any time, he attacked. And his fleet didn't back him up. But what saved Jones was the fact he controlled the tops. All the marksmen, sharpshooters were in his rigging and cleared the deck of the Serapis. So he had the top while the Serapis guns were blasting the bottom of the Richard. But a Scotsman by the name of Hamilton crawled out on the yardarm and was dropping grenades. And he got one down through the hatch, which ignited a whole pile of powder and blew out the Serapis gun deck. And then Captain Pearson, surrendered. So it was during the battle when the colors, I guess the Stars and Stripes, were shot off. Pearson yelled out to Jones, "Have you surrendered?" Jones yelled back, "I have not yet begun to fight," which became, of course, the motto of the U.S. Navy. So that's basically the story. He went on from there, went to Russia, came back, and he finally died in France. And in 1905, they excavated and found his body and brought it back to the United States, and now he's entombed in Annapolis. He's considered the father of the U.S. Navy, even though he really couldn't be considered a father. But he was the United States' first naval hero, and that's all we had in those days because we didn't have a fleet.
Tell me a little bit about the sort of disadvantage he faced against the Serapis. I mean, I know the Serapis was a bigger, newer, faster, better gun ship. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you pretty much said it. It was about the same size, but it had almost 50 18-pound guns, and it was brand new, where Jones' ship, the Bonhomme Richard, was a tired old India merchantman. And he put on 6 18-pounders, which on the second broadside, they blew up, killed almost about 30, 40 men in the gun deck. And then his 12-pounders, some were new, some were old, and they didn't last very long during the battle. They were pretty much blown out by the superior firepower of the Serapis. So that's pretty much the way it went until, as they say, Hamilton blew out the Serapis gun deck.
So what did Jones do tactically to overcome this, physicalist?
He grappled. He saved the day by grappling, because if they'd have just stood off and just hammered each other, the Richard would have gone down very quickly. But he managed to grapple, and that gave him the advantage right there, particularly with his better trained sharpshooters in his rigging. And so anyway, that's about the way it went. He said when the Richard sank, it was with inexpressible grief he watched it sink, because he did want to sail back to port in it and show everybody. But he had the Serapis.
The sharpshooters were able to kill anybody on the foredeck from taking the wheel.
They cleaned the top deck of the Serapis, right, except for Captain Pearson. Apparently they didn't shoot captains in those days, otherwise he and Jones both would have probably been wiped out.
What do you think the Bonhomme Richard has such a historic significance? Why are people so enamored with it?
Well, it's a case of the underdog, beating, the superior foe, so to speak, and that's why it's come down through our history anyway. It's nothing like Nelson, of course, to the British in Trafalgar and all that. But it was the first really morale booster we had. It was like in World War II when we were getting kicked in the Pacific, and then Jimmy Doolittle bombed Tokyo. I mean, strategically it didn't mean much, but it was a great morale booster. And the same thing with Jones. It showed we could beat the British Navy, which was incredible at the time because they were unbeatable.